Hello, I think we are live, Chris. Hi, everyone.
We are live.
Ready to go. So, hello and welcome to the HSE Half Hour. My name is Laura Aucott. I am the Head of Networks and Communications here at Executive Network Group. My colleague Laura and I are going to be bringing you a half-hour live show every month, talking all things recruitment and safety. So, whilst Laura is busy enjoying herself in the bright lights of Las Vegas, I'm joined today by Chris Rowlands, my director, a more than capable host, especially as he's recently chaired an event on this topic. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Lauren. I feel slightly better that Laura's on the plane back from Vegas and is not actually in Vegas right now, but yes. I'm makes me feel better. But I'm standing in nonetheless. And no one will believe that Laura and I are in the same building at the moment. Look at the background. We are. we are in the same building. So look, no, thanks, Lauren, for the intro. And thanks to the growing flock of loyal listeners to this show. Obviously, I'm a rare edition. I've been on once before, which I really, really enjoyed. And I've seen the numbers sort of fly up month in, month out. And that's credit to Laura and Lauren. So I will attempt to do this show justice today. I think we'll just start with the topic, shall we? We threw a few names around in terms of potential. Some were a bit idiotic, they were mine. But what it comes down to is that perception matters. You know, when it comes to corporate communications, and in particular around increasingly important topics and topics under which companies are coming under greater scrutiny. How that's communicated really does matter, and companies are in for it at the minute. You know, you put something out there that's unsubstantiated or that doesn't sit well with the audience, and the accusations start flying. So we're just going to talk a little bit about how to get that messaging, or how to attempt to get that messaging right. And we're talking here about non-financial performance. So diversity and inclusion, sustainability, environmental impact, and of course, health and safety. I feel like leaders are treading increasingly narrow path here between wanting to evidence their efforts, wanting to evidence their good behaviours and the good behaviours of their company, with this threatening fear of being called out if they put the wrong message out there. So what we don't want is companies and business leaders to see this type of communication as an unnecessary risk, because then we lose all the access to all the great case studies and all the great information that can flow between individuals. So look, it's a tricky subject. We've done our research, haven't we, Lauren? We know what we're talking about.
Yes.
So
we hope. Yeah, no, we definitely have. So, yes, as always, live show today. We did have some slight technical issues last time. So if that does continue with regards to the comments on today's show, please do drop me a LinkedIn message and I'll aim to get to your message or your comment as soon as. Feel free to put Chris under some pressure and ask him some questions. I'm sure that he'll love that.
I wasn't warned about any technical issues or any questions. So
well, there we go. Starting off with that. But yeah, as always, interactive sessions, so please feel free to get those across. So for our 15th episode, which is absolutely crazy, we are covering the subtle art of corporate communication. So how to get it right, how to avoid washing and corporate virtual signaling, especially with topics such as safety, sustainability, well-being, and of course ED&I. So a lot to cover in just 30 minutes. So I mentioned in the intro, Chris has recently very capably chaired an event that we did in collaboration with London HR Connection. So Chris, can you give us an overview of that recent panel discussion where we delved into this subject of brand perception and comms?
Yeah, you were there, so weren't you, Lauren? So it sort of weaved into the conversation, but became quite a I wouldn't say contentious topic, but it certainly stoked some debate in the room. So this is for our sister company. Lots of the listeners today will know HSE Recruitment Network brand. The sister business is Network HR. So we partnered with London HR Connection, which is it's been around about 85 years. So it's a great community of HR directors and HR professionals. And one of our clients, a fantastic business called Fidelis. We're very grateful that they hosted it in their lovely offices, has to be said. So just to arrow in, I hosted the panel, so I was I guess in your seat a little bit more today, Lauren, posing the questions rather than having to answer any. But I'm a bit of a sponge at these events, so I just try to absorb as much as possible. And I think you did a great write-up, which I think we'll put in the chat at the end, so people can have those links. When it comes to the bit around how you position this and how you communicate it, I think a lot of the mistakes that come around corporate, and in particular, we looked at ED&I, just to say that the topic was the power of perception in cultivating diversity. So this was specific to ED&I. It comes back to something I said earlier. A lot of this is born from fear of being seen, or certainly was over the last couple of years, of being seen not to support certain events or to support certain celebrations or certain movements. So, the obvious things. Black History Month was one that came up regularly. Pride Month, International Women's Day. I don't think I'm wrong here that pretty much every day in the calendar's covered now in terms of has some event or celebration assigned to it. Today is Intersex Awareness Day, for those who weren't aware. But I do think the landscape is getting better. I think if you look away where a couple of years ago, you couldn't put anything out there without shots being fired, or it certainly felt that way. Whereas, look, there'll always be cynics, and there'll always be people who seek to undermine or question the content that's put out there. But I think less of that, and what it comes down to now is about authenticity. So we were lucky enough to have Jade Green on the panel, and I'm going to steal her imagery for this one. I thought it was brilliant. Jade basically described it as a window. So it's a window theory. So he said it's not an open door. You don't have to let everyone root around in your living room or other rooms in your corporate world to make it authentic. But equally, you don't get to just paint a picture and assume everyone's going to accept what you say. So I liked her window analogy because, with a window, you can curate what you want people to see. I put these nice trees in before we started today, so it looks nice. No, look, you can curate what you want people to see, but equally, you can let people have a peer in and actually see what sits behind this very nice image. And I thought that was a really nice way of describing it. It's about closing the gap between perception and reality. And look, marketing and comms is all about building a perception, isn't it? But as soon as people start questioning the gap between the perception that you're trying to create or you're attempting to create and the actual reality, that's when you're going to get yourself in trouble. Equally, we talked about the difference between internal and external comms. There is a difference in that, but actually a lot of the content that goes out externally will of course be viewed by your team members and by your staff. You can't expect your team members to toe the company line if you're making statements that they simply know are untrue. So, and again, I'm not saying those are always deceitful comments. It can be marketing spin, but actually if it doesn't feel authentic to people in your business, you can't expect them just to suck it up and toe the company line. People have their opinions on these things. So I think that definitely came to the fore. Just again, to come back to being authentic, just avoid sort of meaningless and unsubstantiated changes to either your branding or to your messaging. So look, there's obvious examples, isn't there? Changing the color of your logo.
The rainbow washing is real. I've seen that. And people are starting to speak out about it, that they're not happy with that at all. If, there isn't a wider, I suppose, strategy behind it rather than just a pretty logo change for a month and then back to it.
It comes back to the window thing, right, doesn't it? So you can't just change something and then expect not to be questioned. And actually, you probably open more questions by just changing your logo than you could ever imagine. And it's not about not supporting these movements and showing your support for what are some very important causes and actually some really brilliant educational periods of the year, whether it's a day or a month or whatever it's straight. It's not about that. It's just about, you are attaching your brand to a certain statement, and you've got to be able to back it up. We talked in Laura about I think this is one of our favorites, the gender pay gap bot. If nobody's seen that on Twitter, I'm supposed to call it X now, I encourage you to go look at it. So on International Women's Day is the best example. I'm sure this will come up when ethnicity pay gap reporting is a legal requirement as well. But on International Women's Day, when you get these beautifully filmed videos that companies put out there about the women in their organization, how they feel empowered and how amazing they are, the gender pay gap bot just simply puts their current gender pay gap in there. And I won't name it's well-known financial services business who put this beautifully curated black and white videos up about their women in their business and the gender pay gap, which has put the current gap between men and women is 36.8%. Women are paid 38.6% lower than men. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Again, a very pretty video, which I'm sure cost them a lot of money, is going to be questioned. You can't just expect people to sort of swallow it. And I guess the last thing, which actually was quite refreshing to hear, was especially from some, Jade's an ED&I specialist, and at the end of the day, the message was just pick your battles. A company is at the end of the day a commercial entity. It's not supposed to be, and was never designed to be, a force for good on all fronts. Set genuine targets around the things that matter and the things that you genuinely feel you can materially affect, would be the message there. And look, if that means you are quieter on some subjects than others, that's okay, and I think that's become increasingly okay. I think I heard someone was speaking over a drink after the event had sort of reached its conclusion, said, look, no one ever got prosecuted for a lack of evidence, right? So I think the message there was like, look, if you're not doing something in a space, or you feel you need to do better, then just don't have your hand forced into putting something out there. So I mean, those are some of the big things I took from it. But as I say, you were there, Lawrence. I might have missed a couple of things maybe on there.
Yeah, I mean, to echo your thoughts, and from what I took from the panel, I think it's about being clear on your audience. So I know that this is drilled into marketeers, especially. It's understanding your demographic, understanding who your audience is that you're communicating to. But I think that's especially important when you're, communicating important messages. So external stakeholders, for example, may care more about diversity, but the internal team members care more about inclusion. So it's okay to adapt your messaging dependent on your audience. But I think overall, as what you said, Chris, it's about being accurate, being honest. And of course, there's going to be a bit of marketing spin, there's going to be glossy videos, but deceitful messaging will be found out. And unless you've got the evidence to back up your statements, then, it's not to say avoid it completely, but pick your battles kind of thing, and back yourself with evidence. So I think that brings us nicely, Chris, onto, let's talk around safety communication. So just in the health and safety world, this is a topic that requires, constant comms, and of course it's usually quite serious, isn't it? So it can almost feel a bit rigid, very educational, and it can be perceived as like a repetition of rules, and you must do X, Y, and Z, and we've had this many accidents or we haven't, and it's very corporate and very rigid at times. So in one of our previous episodes, we did have a great guest, Karen J. Hewitt, and she spoke about the power of storytelling. And I think that this is really important to convey and communicate a message, especially using examples to influence, persuade, educate. So I suppose I can ask you, Chris, what are your top tips for, safety communication in particular?
Yeah, it's probably worth mentioning that some don't know me, as I've not been on this many times. And certainly Laura is absolutely the face of our health and safety recruitment brand. But I've been in this space now about 19 years, I think, health and safety recruitment. So I've seen the evolution, and I call it an evolution really, in terms of the way that the safety professionals are perceived. And lots of those steps forward have been positive, but equally with greater visibility comes greater scrutiny, right? So I'm going to break it down, actually, if that's all right, Lauren. So I think this is the HSE Half Hour, and I think the H, the S, and the E actually have very different challenges. So health, safety, and environmental, certainly, I'll come on to last, because if anything's getting washed at the minute, greenwashing is the one that most companies are being actively accused of and are being scrutinised on. But I'll start with health. And obviously there's different meanings of health, but I'm going to hit on mental health really, because that has been a huge topic over the last couple of years. It's fantastic to see that the stigma around perceptions of mental health have really changed, and that has created a lot more openness, a much more communication around the topic. There are still huge challenges, and I think of things like the statistics around, the rates of male suicide in the construction sector in comparison to deaths on site and those kind of horrible statistics, which we're not making enough progress on. But things like National Suicide Day and those types of things, I think they would have felt quite comfortable a few years ago, and that those conversations are thankfully much more comfortable, even if the truth isn't comfortable, if that makes sense. But I think it's a really sensitive topic. I'm gonna chuck something out here which might make me hated by many here, but look, what you can't do is use mental health as a Gen Z hiring strategy. And frankly, you do see this. Everyone is told, every business leader is told, Gen Z care about they care about the environment, they care about business purpose, and they care about mental health, and they're more open about those topics. And look, it's not about just putting these wonderful stories about how you supported people with mental health problems through your organisation, and seeing that as making you a more palatable opportunity for Gen Z. I hope that doesn't happen as much as I'm making a statement there, but I can't help thinking that when you're looking at hiring strategies and bringing the next generation in, that has fed into it. But I'll put that to one side for a second. My sort of statement here would be, I've spoken to a few sort of mental health specialists on this, is just let individual stories stand on their own. I know it's really tempting if you've got someone within your organisation who's willing to stand up and have really quite difficult to hear stories sometimes, and that could be their own personal stories or stories of those close to them. Don't then corporately jump on that bandwagon and start talk about how you support that individual, or even just slapping your logos across that individual's personal story. I think let those stories breathe, right? They need to stand on their own 2 feet, and they are much more powerful if you allow it to do that. What a company can do is talk about their proactive efforts. I think surely we're there in the conversation now that, things like employee assistance programs and mental health first aiders, that's great. That's a very reactive approach. I love it when I see companies talk about what they're doing proactively to help people manage their mental health. So that would be my message really with mental health. Let some of these more sensitive stories stand on their own 2 feet, allow them to be personal, but equally talk about what you're doing proactively, which brings me nicely onto safety, because as I say, I've been in this sector a long time, and we made an active stance. If Laura was here, she'd know the exact date, but I'm going to say about 8-9 years ago now, to make sure that the HSE Recruitment Network, particularly on platforms like LinkedIn, we only put positive news stories out there. At the time, lots of channels who would talk about fatalities and talk about near misses and talk about fines and prosecutions and all these kind of things. And look, that stuff's out there, and I'm not saying the stick doesn't work, but it's much more engaging to look at the carrot, right? So I would say that safety, excuse the pun, is the safest part of all of these conversations. When it comes to ED&I, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to environmental, no one's ever going to accuse a company of trying to save too many lives, right? I don't think that's
no.
And I will happily take it up with whoever throws that kind of accusation around. Again, it's just about being accurate and being honest. We all know safety professionals and the internet, but they've got long memories. So if there's been fatalities within your organisation, if there's been some fairly significant incidents, those don't get forgotten. So you can't just wash over those things. But I think the safety community is particularly good at owning those circumstances and talking about the learning that have come from those. And I think as a network, safety practitioners are, I guess, probably prudent by nature, but equally always looking for methods of improvement. I think the biggest branding change in health and safety, certainly in the last 10 years, has been around things like Safety Differently and Safety 2, and a completely different approach to how you, bit of a paradigm shift really in terms of how you not just measure safety in terms of whether it's lagging indicators or leading indicators, but more so around how safety is viewed internally. And all I would encourage people on this session today and safety practitioners generally is just shout louder. Lauren and Laura have done some great sessions on personal branding within safety. I'd encourage you to watch some of those and just get your good work out there, because like I said earlier, I don't think I've ever seen anyone accuse a business of caring too much about safety. So I think that's probably the safest part of all of this conversation, the bit you can't really get wrong. Which brings me on to environment sustainability. You can definitely get this wrong. So greenwashing, I mean, people may not know what greenwashing means. I mean, Lauren, do you want to give people a quick summary of what greenwashing means to you?
You've thrown me right under here. No, so we see this a lot when businesses, are accused of greenwashing, where they are taking a stance primarily on their kind of marketing channels, that they're all around sustainability. They're making, I suppose, claims to how sustainable they are, and utilising content that is very sustainable focused in order to, I suppose, promote their own business, promote themselves in that green light of what they're actually doing, but they haven't got the proof to back it up. They may not have a sustainable supply chain, etc. And they're making claims that basically can't be backed up, but want to be seen and, I suppose, want their brand to be synonymous with a sustainable brand, but are not doing the key factors to make them that way.
Yeah, that sounds like a fair summary. I think, look, it's the biggest accusation that's been thrown around. Rightly so. We're in an environmental crisis, really, in terms of the actions of corporates with regards to their environmental practice and governments and countries and everything else in between. It's obviously heavily regulated. It's increasingly regulated as a sector, environmental and sustainability. And in terms of greenwashing particularly, I think that is now under regulation. So again, we can put this in the chat at the end, can't we, Lauren, in terms of a link. But recently the government, through the Competition and Markets Authority, launched the Green Claims Code. So this is different to breaking environmental legislation. This is about the claims made via websites, social media posts of companies. And I think there's a stat on there that, again, I encourage people to have a look around the link if it's not something you're aware of. If you are, then I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on this as an approach. But they reckon about 40% of the environmental claims on company websites are flatly false. So this isn't fluffy. This isn't some nice gushing of fact. This is out and out, sort of lies in terms of companies' environmental impact and the steps they are taking to overcome them. So this is punitive, right? So if the Competition and Markets Authority believe that companies are, in essence, greenwashing or making false claims, under this Green Claims Code, you can be fined. I think it's in combination with the sort of Advertising Standards Authority, but up to 10% of your annual turnover, which is a big number, right? And regardless of the size of your company, that's a big number. Yeah. So, but that's in line with the importance of this as a topic, and I think equally people's lack of acceptance of companies thinking that they can make bold claims about their environmental performance and think it won't be questioned. So, pretty bold move by the government, but this isn't a political show, but I like to think in that case that we can endorse. Look, and people just want to know that those statements and those claims are authentic. That's specific to business to consumer. That's B2C business, by the way, are covered. And again, look, if people make genuine choices around their purchases based on the claims of businesses, we want to make sure those claims are true, don't we? So, so I mean, that's my thought on environment, but you could have a whole show really on environment sustainability, couldn't you? But through our research, that's a fairly recent change and one that could have a big impact, I think.
Yeah, and that's quite scary when you think about how much you can get fined if you are being deceitful and misleading with claims. So you mentioned there, Chris,
I think is the idea there, isn't it?
Yeah, well, definitely. But you mentioned there the sessions around personal branding that myself and Laura have done this year. And part of that was all around kind of LinkedIn audits. And although it was personal branding, I think the general consensus when we were speaking to safety professionals were it was kind of, they were locked in with fear that they didn't want to get it wrong. They certainly didn't want to personally get it wrong. But I think this fear can be attributed to businesses as well. They don't want to be accused of the greenwashing, rainbow washing, or any other sort of washing. So instead, they choose not to post, and the silence can also speak volumes in its own way and can be just as damaging. So we did mention in today's intro, you know, some companies are strategic in getting it right, others not so much. Chris, can I ask you to give us some examples of do's and don'ts when it comes to an overall comms strategy? What have you seen that works well?
Yeah, we've got some specific examples. I'm just mindful of naming companies on this particular session, but I think we can again, we could probably pull a few of those together and put those in the chat. So what I've tried to do is try and aggregate all that information and put it into some genuine lessons. It's consistent with what we said throughout. Really, the first point in here is just be honest and be transparent. Marketing's marketing, but just don't fudge the figures. And I think what happens a lot has happened in safety in the past, and certainly is happening in the environmental sphere, is people being very selective with the information they choose to share. And you can't make a general claim. So zero emissions is a big one at the minute. So companies claim to have zero emissions or net zero. But don't make that claim about a certain part of your business or a certain product or service that you offer, and just ignore the rest of it and the sort of the overall kind of impact of your business. Because whilst it's nice to be able to put that statement out there and say this is net zero, that it needs to be taken in context. And I think that's definitely happened. Being open and being transparent is the messaging throughout this, isn't it? Be authentic, be honest. It sounds simple, right? You'd hope. Every business, every politician, every colleague is open and honest, but I think we have to be realistic. So that's one. Again, consider your net impact. So you can make claims about the environmental performance of your business if your product or your service that you offer does have an environmental impact. Consider the net impact of that. And I think that sounds simple, but actually it's not always easy to calculate. But considering the net impact, people won't ignore it. So I don't think you can ignore it either. Which brings us on neatly to sort of think about what it is that you're claiming. I know that sounds simple, but this is where your marketing and your comms team can come in. With all the best will in the world, you can make statements and they can come across as either ambiguous or misconstrued. And actually that can do more damage than good. So of course it's important that you kind of promote what you're doing from environmental protection, from social responsibility, from ethical behaviours, from safe practices as well as health and safety. But do take some advice from comms experts if you've got marketing teams or your small business, external support in terms of how you actually get that messaging out there, and make sure you substantiate it. Again, if we've not got anything across today, if there's only one thing, then don't make a statement without being able to substantiate it. And that can be as simple as basically having they call it red teams or just a sounding board that kind of pushes back and says, okay, how do I know that's true? It's great that you said that, but how do I even know that's true? Which sort of brings on to get a sounding board, a diverse, open, honest group of people give you meaningful feedback. There's some great PR companies out there who maybe will take an ownership of your communication, but it may be fantastically worded, but will it land with the audience that you're trying to resonate with? I think, you as safety professionals or environmental professionals have a greater understanding of what your audience is looking for. And then just avoid buzzwords and the obvious sort of cliched words when you're communicating this. Increasingly over the years, I think corporate speakers gone down a little bit, and just honest communication has gone up, which I think can only be a good thing for business and their interaction with their external stakeholders. And lastly, I hope what didn't come across earlier when I was talking about the different sort of Pride Months and Black History Months and those sort of disability awareness and all those meaningful days was with any negative slant. It was companies' reaction, which is negative. They are fantastic vehicles to help educate yourself, help educate your colleagues, and just take those opportunities internally. Doesn't mean you need to shout about it externally that you are doing it. Sometimes you are actually allowed to do things for yourself and for your business without sticking it on a social media post. So they were some of the conclusions. I think we're getting very close to our allotted 30. They will be the sort of conclusions, but I'll hand back to you, Laura, in case I've missed any, or in case you want to sort of wrap it up.
Yeah, Thank you ever so much for that, Chris. I mean, one thing that I've really taken from everything that you've said today is just consistency, isn't it? It's not about who's actually sharing it. And I think you've even mentioned about sharing the load. The more voices, the better. But as long as it's consistent, so, you know, different voices and different perspectives can make a message even that more powerful. But if you're sending mixed messages or being contradictory, and again, not backing up your claims, that can be, you know, a real poor thing for a brand to do. So I think the consistency is key. If anyone does want to speak with Chris further about it, I can volunteer his LinkedIn over and you can drop him a message. But, you know, I've really enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you ever so much for joining me today, Chris.
Thank you. Very enjoyable.
The subtle art of corporate comms, and I think there's, you know, 30 minutes, there's a lot to cover, and we could have easily split this into probably about 4 different sessions.
Well, if you split any of these down, I will happily come back on, you know, and with you.
There we go. I've got proof now that that's on recording. So can invite you back anytime. But thank you very much for joining us. If anyone does have any further questions, please do feel free to reach out. We'll be back. I say myself and Laura will be back next month. We do have a special guest discussing again all things safety. So do join us at the end of November, and it will be back to the normal time of 12:30. I've got to get this in because we've got to put Laura under a bus.
Change the time.
Yeah, but yeah, back at the normal time next month at 12:30. Thank you ever so much for joining us, and thanks, Chris. And again, links to everything can be found in the comments, which is the event write-up that we did around breaking barriers, and the green claims code as well, which is very interesting reading. All right, thank you ever so much. See you later.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.